Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending where you are in the country. We'll get started on time. I know it's a busy time of the year for people, and so we want to be sure that we give you all this good information within this hour. Today's session is on the QIAT-PS Student Self-Evaluation Matrix. This is part 2 of a 2-part webinar series that AbleNet has sponsored. And this one will really look at our new tool for QIAT-PS on students considering assistive technology and skills they need around that when they go to post-secondary education. My name is Janet Peters. I'm a project coordinator on assistive and educational technology for the Great Lakes ADA Center. We provide technical assistance on the Americans with Disabilities Act in the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes ADA Center is also part of the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research out of Neidler, which is part of the ADA National Network. Also co-presenting with me today is Gayl Bowser. She is an independent consultant, and she has been involved with the QIAT-PS project really since the beginning, and a very critical piece of the work we've done with QIAT-PS. You might know her from the QIAT, the Quality Indicators and Assistive Technology Leadership Team, which is the group that has been involved with the quality indicators for assistive technology in K-12. And in fact, they just recently came out with a new book called Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology, a comprehensive guide to assistive technology services. So if you have not heard of that book, I would highly recommend it. It gives really great background for AT in K-12. So that's a little bit about who we are. I pulled up a poll right here, so if you would just take a minute to answer who you are in the audience, we can get an idea of who we are speaking with today. Great, I see the numbers coming in. Looks like we have several AT specialists, some related service providers, consumer, teacher, post-secondary are all represented. No parents out there? Parents of students who use assistive technology? Nope, no one so far. So this gives us a good idea. I think that the student self-evaluation matrix will be of interest actually to all of you in this, in this webinar, and it's really bridging that gap of transition services from K-12 into post-secondary. Thank you for sharing with us who you were, or who you are presently. So the idea with the student evaluation matrix, if you were part of the session last week, we talked a little bit about why we focused on quality indicators. And in that work in creating our campus self-evaluation matrix to help colleges or post-secondary institutions really improve their assistive technology service delivery, some of the feedback we got was there were students coming into the post-secondary environment who needed stronger assistive technology skills. And so there is an idea, very specific transition services that are highly defined in IDEA, and teams work really hard in K-12 on that. The transition services in K-12 don't specifically mention assistive technology, but what we're going to talk about with the student self-evaluation matrix fits right in and aligns with the transition services already required. So transition services means a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability. The first pointer is that it's results-oriented. So it focuses in K-12 on improving the academic and functional achievement of a child with a disability, and moves as they transition and move from school to post-secondary activities. The second piece of transition services in the IDEA law, IDEA, is that transition services are based on the individual's needs, taking into account a child's strengths, preferences, and interests. So it's pretty well defined, and we really tried, and we think that we have developed a tool that that supports those required transition services that are already happening. But to be clear, there is a big difference. There are many different requirements, rights, and responsibilities as a young adult transitions out of high school into adult service. So IDEA, the law that governs special education, really is an entitlement law, meaning that agencies or schools need to be proactive in identifying what a student needs and documenting and giving that assistance. It's a proactive entitlement law. Once a student transitions into adult services, they're governed by things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is really a civil rights legislation. And so that essentially means that a post-secondary school does not have a legal obligation to identify students with disabilities and provide them services. Students with disabilities need to self-identify and self-refer for those services. That might not seem major, but that's actually an entire mindset, both for the student and for families working with this issue. And so most of the things that we have in the student self-evaluation matrix kind of try to look at what supports that transition into the adult services. Research does report that only 24% of students who were identified by their high schools as having a disability were receiving accommodations or supports in the post-secondary area. And that's really, for me, mostly I get calls once something's not going well in the post-secondary environment and someone says, oh, I used this assistive technology in high school, but they haven't requested it or gone to the Disability Service Office to make that process start happening. So those are some key critical features that happen in that transition process. We base our student self-evaluation matrix and really our campus tool as well with an underlying assumption that students with disabilities can be successful in post-secondary. There is some preparation and work that goes into that. Some key factors to that are attitude, self-advocacy, and preparation. And students with disabilities, they do need to be prepared to work a little bit more independently and more collaboratively with an institution, with the institution that's providing them services, because the legal mandate on a post-secondary school is again, a civil right to provide equal access, but not to proactively actually do much for that student. Now, some schools do some proactive work, and if a student needs more support, there are schools that do better with that, but to know that up front and to just know that there's some proactive independence required. There was a question that came in that says, can you cite the research that says 24%? I will have to get back to where my source on that is because I just have it in my notes that research reports. So, but I do have it from a research article, so I will be sure, Deb, when you send that evaluation out that you can send that information. So sorry I didn't have it written down, but it is from a research article we have. So with the QIAT-PS project that is sponsored by the Great Lakes ADA Center, we have created 2 tools to support assistive technology in this process. And as I mentioned, we talked about the campus tool, campus self-evaluation matrix last week, and that session is archived. And if you are in the post-secondary or work with transition students, I would be glad to give you more information about that. We are in the process of creating this next tool called the Student Self-Evaluation Matrix that is really geared towards students to answer independently or with the transition team in K-12, or possibly on a college campus, so the Disability Service Office gets more information from them. So we're going to talk about that today. I will start by turning it over to Gayl to give you some context about who this tool might be good for.
So thank you, Janet, and thanks for that great introduction. We did want to set the context for the use of these quality indicators. So we created sort of a sample student. He's probably a composite of a lot of students who might be moving from high school to the K-12 environment. I mean, to the post-secondary environment. And what we'd like to do is talk about the quality indicators that we've developed for student use of assistive technology and apply them to a student like Eli. So he's a 16-year-old with a learning disability. He has trouble reading and writing, and he's been using a tablet at school for the past 2 years and an on-screen keyboard with word prediction. So he wants to go to a local community college. And many of our students with disabilities start at the community college level because they tend to be a little bit smaller and a little bit more personalized education. He's hoping eventually to get a bachelor's degree at a state college. The Eli that I'm thinking of actually wants to be a forester. So he'd like a bachelor's degree in forestry, but he's going to go to the community college to get his requirements out of the way. His grades aren't great at school, but his staff and family say he's capable if he'd only just buckle down and try harder. One of the problems with a statement like that is we sometimes need to define buckle down and try harder. And one of the ways that we can do that is to talk more about how he might use his assistive technology in the post-secondary setting. So he's never attended his own IEP meetings. He has 45 minutes a day in small group instruction in the resource room. So he has a fairly typical educational program for a student who might be considering going to the community college. I did want to mention one thing before we get into the post-secondary indicators themselves, and that is that there's a group of students which is fairly rapidly growing who are a little bit different than Eli. They are students with developmental disabilities who might be going on to maybe even some specialized programs at the community college or college level. We're seeing a growing number of programs for students with developmental disabilities at the post-secondary level, and we believe that these indicators also apply to that group of students if they use assistive technology. A little bit later on, we're going to ask you or talk to you about opportunities to give us feedback about these indicators, and if you're a person who works with that population, we'd love to hear from you also. So what does Eli need to learn? What can we do to help Eli be more prepared for his post-secondary education opportunities, and also to take on that self-referral responsibility that we heard from Janet that changes in the post-secondary environment. The college is not going to be able to go and find Eli and give him special services without his request. So what are the things that we could teach him about the transition and the differences in his new school environment that might help him be more successful with assistive technology? Let me say also that there's a lot of wording in IDEA about what transition services need to be provided and how we help students plan for their transitions from K-12 to post-K-12 environments. What isn't present in IDEA is any wording about how assistive technology fits into those transition activities. So one of the things we've done in the QIAT-PS project over and over again is to try and just call attention to this one aspect of the many, many things that students who move to post-secondary environments might be encountering, just to make sure that we don't lose all the great progress that students like Eli make as they use assistive technology in their K-12 environments. When we meet with post-secondary educators, we find that one of the things they tell us is that sometimes it isn't until much later in the school year, about this time of a school year, where they begin to understand that students had supports and services at the high school level that they may or may not have even asked for at the post-secondary level. So this is a list of the student indicators themselves. These are the topics that are covered in each of the quality indicators. And I want to talk just a little bit about what a quality indicator is, just so that we're all clear. These are not steps to take. The quality indicators are a set of, in this case, student skills that we believe will help a student to be more successful at the post-secondary level and to maintain the continuity in their use of assistive technology. So this is the total list. If you're familiar at all with the QIAT-PS work, you will see that this list has changed a little bit in the last year. We have taken on a project to update these indicators and validate them. So it used to be a shorter list of indicators, and now we're up to 10. So let's talk about each one of them. The first one is that the student is aware of the impact of his or her disability on performance and knowledgeable about AT used to address the disability. So at this very basic level, what we hope at this point is that students will be able to say to people something like, my name is Eli, I have a learning disability that makes it more difficult for me to read and write, and so I use a tablet with word prediction to help me get all my information onto paper, and the tablet also reads out loud to me. So just some basic self-awareness that helps students to describe their disability to other people and why their assistive technology and any other accommodations they may need are necessary. It's a very basic skill that I think at the K-12 level we can begin to teach early, especially as students begin to carry their own technology into general ed classrooms. They may, at the beginning of every term, need to explain to their teachers what it is they're using and why as they encounter new instructors. In addition to the quality indicators themselves, we've developed for each indicator a 1 to 5 rating scale that is really the basic activity for our students with disabilities who might be looking at the QIAT-PS indicators in preparation or in developing that coordinated set of activities that's mentioned in IDEA, so that you can see on this 1 to 5 scale at the beginning level the place that you might check or select for your own rating, or if other people are rating your skills or ability. The beginning level is I'm unaware or misinformed about the impact of my disability. So I might have some preconceived notions that aren't exactly accurate as I begin to think about moving to a post-secondary environment. On the level 5, the sort of expert indicator area here, You see the statement, I have an accurate and clear sense of my goals, abilities, and need for assistive technology in each class or environment. So there's a lot of space between those two indicator areas, but the focus is, do I understand my own disability and my need for assistive technology and how it helps me? So here's some ideas that you might think about as you begin to teach students some of those kinds of skills related to this indicator. So can the student identify tasks that will require AT use in post-secondary environments? For example, can they use a Braille note taker to take notes in a meeting, or can they use a Braille note taker to take notes in a regular classroom environment? Can they determine how AT will be used in classroom routines and post-secondary activities? So what's the right tool for note-taking in a particular class? Can they identify environmental accommodations needed? Like, does this student know if they need it, how to arrange to use real-time captioning in large classes when they aren't maybe able to hear the information from the instructor as well as they might in a smaller group? So these are just some examples. We've tried to use a bunch of examples throughout this presentation of different disabilities, different accommodation needs, but hopefully this will get you thinking about a student that you know who might be moving to post-secondary education. I encourage you to, as much as possible, apply this to a real person because it'll be more meaningful for you. Next indicator, knowledge of legal rights regarding AT. So in this indicator, we hope that the student understands the laws which address their rights to accommodation and their rights to assistive technology, including how to get help when access is denied, including how to maybe do some sort of an appeal process. And you heard last week that many of our colleges and university programs, when they've used the QIAT-PS campus indicators, are doing things like developing an appeals process when students find that a professor they have isn't allowing the accommodations that they've been that have been arranged for them, or things like that. So the intent statement here, the thing that describes this indicator better, talks about the specific laws that Janet's mentioned before, and focuses on the fact that students themselves need to identify times when their rights are not being addressed and know how to get help. Now, we can begin to do that in the K-12 setting, just in order to help prepare students for that move to college when there won't be anybody necessarily who can teach this skill. So let's move on. Here's the matrix again. Everything from I do not know about the laws regarding my rights to number 5, I know how to request AT as an accommodation and can act on that knowledge to acquire the AT devices and supports I need. If our students don't have practice doing this at the K-12 setting, the likelihood that they'll be able to do it in a brand new college environment with all the things that are happening to them in their first term of school is much less. So it's a skill that we can be teaching at the K-12 level that will carry over and help students be prepared for post-secondary education. We can teach students to apply the specific laws that apply to their assistive technology or their access needs, and we can help them investigate what the formal appeals or complaint procedure is when AT is not provided. We can do that ahead of time, but also make contact with the Office of Disabled Student Services at the college before our students move on to that new environment. So those are, again, some examples of things that our students might begin to practice at the K-12 setting. This next indicator is disclosure of disability for AT accommodation. One of the things that many of our students don't understand as they move to the K-12 setting is that their rights to confidentiality are highly protected. And the only way that people in the K-12 setting will know that they have a disability is if the student not only discloses that they have a disability, but provides the information and documentation that demonstrates what that disability is, and in some cases what AT accommodations they've used previously. Janet mentioned earlier the statistic that only 24% of students who leave high school actually use the services of the Office of Disabled Students Services at the college level. And what we see from the campus indicators is that a concerted effort really needs to be made so that students are aware of what resources are available to them to help support their needs for accommodations in the curriculum and in the campus environment. Here's the matrix again. I want to remind you that this is a paper document, but also a wonderful online tool that students can use to rate themselves and maybe rate themselves over and over again to see if they're making progress. So for me, this matrix has become a sort of a progress monitoring tool as we think about assistive technology and independence with assistive technology at the college level. Here's some suggestions for activities that students need to be able to apply, not just know, but apply the confidentiality of protections of ADA and Section 508 to your situation. That means, do your students know how to sign a release of information and indicate who information should be released to? Can they talk with the college's Office of Disability Supports about the services that they need and explain their disability and the reasons for that? I'm going to take just a minute here and introduce you to William, who is a student from Texas that I had the opportunity to work with when we were developing some transition information for the state of Texas. William is a student who at this point in his life, in this photo, was graduating from high school and moving on to college. And I wanted to just give you an example of what that kind of self-disclosure and self-advocacy looks like in terms of assistive technology. So let's watch a 2-minute video here. Come on. Okay. Click the play button to start your video. Let's
Tell
go.
us some things about how you learned to make choices about when to use the technology, when it was appropriate, and what particular
It sounds a little
piece
fuzzy
of
at the beginning. I
technology
apologize. It'll get better.
situations, as well as you have been very instrumental in self-determination and making your own choices and determining when you needed to call people or get support or that type of thing. Could you tell us a little bit, how do you think you got to be so self-determined?
Well, I've self-advocated for myself for a long time, probably because I have dyslexia, and also I suffer from familial Mediterranean fever, which is a form of arthritis, and Crohn's disease, which is the autoimmune disease of the inflammation of the small and large intestine. And because I was sick a lot in elementary school before my Crohn's disease was diagnosed, I did a lot of, I had to self-advocate a lot, because when you miss so many classes, I had to call teachers and deal with the problems of of missing that much class, and that definitely led me to be more self-determined. But one of the other things that sort of have always driven me is I did not want to be in, although I always have been wanting to be in the honors program but I'm special ed, so one of the things that I realized is if I want to still maintain my special ed support and also take honors classes and do that, I would have to self-advocate because since I was taking honors courses, they would want to dump me out. They would want to dump me out of special ed. And I found that, if I self-advocated for myself, they would not dump me out of the program because I still need my modifications. And it's because of that I've been able to maintain an honor schedule and graduate cum laude from my high school. So.
Okay, so one of the things I wish for each of you is that you have a William in your life. He does such an amazing job of explaining his disability, doing that disclosure that this indicator talks about, and also explaining the importance of his assistive technology in his own life. This is a document. You see the web address here. About disclosure of disability. This is a document that was written for students. So if you're thinking about wanting to teach your high school students about this topic, this is a really good resource that is a free download. So I'm going to hand it back to Janet, and she's going to talk about some of the next indicators.
Great. I'm back. Thank you. I see that there's a question from Teresa about the, I think the 411 disability, right, Teresa? That is free to access, and I'll just go back to that slide really quickly. You will have access to these slides, but if you do a Google search on 411 disability disclosure, this whole notebook is available to download or to complete online. They have 2 resource tools with that. And then the online tool, as far as the student self-evaluation matrix that we are talking about today, that's in development right now. We are unveiling it, so to speak, at ATIA conference, the Assistive Technology Industry Association conference in Orlando in January. And in January, basically, we will have it online on the QIAT-PS website. If that answers your question, Teresa, thumbs up. If not, go ahead and follow up with that. I'm going to continue on with the 10 indicators for the matrix. The next one being self-advocacy. We think they're all very critical, but this one is specifically really critical for students with disabilities in post-secondary. And the idea is that self-advocacy skills allow the student to take that independent leadership role with the various resources that campuses have for students with disabilities, including funding, training, or other aspects of their assistive technology use. And an expert in this area, would be a student that knows their assistive technology needs, is available to support and consistently take the leadership role in making sure that they have the device and the services that they need. And then beginner, of course, is someone not at that stage where they're not sure what assistance they need or what's available to them. In the K-12 area, there's skills, actually at any point, this can happen in post-secondary as well, but skills specifically and activity ideas that a student can do to support this indicator. I think really important is the ability to contact the Office of Disability Services, which is called different things in different campuses, but where they get their accommodation. They usually do have an application for to be supported in an intake process to qualify for accommodations at the post-secondary level, so practicing that with a student, having a student make a list of what AT they use and what help they might need with that, being really self-aware of what they are going to need to advocate for in that area with assistive technology. AT communication is being able to effectively communicate with the various stakeholders in a student's life that may need to support or know about assistive technology, specifically faculty or other people involved in academic life. A student will need to communicate to, be able to talk about, write about, or otherwise discuss what their disability is, how it affects academic or educational performance, and where assistive technology plays into that and what role. So again, thinking about skills and activities, this is a learned skill. Communication is a learned skill, and the more that students practice this in, scenario, role-playing, practice talking about, asking for help with their assistive technology, polite conversation, knowing how to set up, talking with the Disability Service Office, for example, to talk about how to upgrade or set up their assistive technology device or some other feature or new features they might need. Students will get better with this. This just takes practice and knowing that there's a fair amount of communication that will go into supporting assistive technology in that post-secondary environment. And people have been doing it, but feel free to write any questions as we're presenting, and we will try to answer them as we go along. So continue with that, just to give you the thumbs up on that. Assistive technology self-evaluation is that the student knows how to evaluate personal performance when using their AT and make adjustments in the AT in order to improve what's going on. This self-evaluation requires that a student, analyze all their performance information, such as grades or other feedback they're getting, and determining if the assistive technology is working for them or improving their educational outcomes. This takes a fair amount of self-direction in the fact that in most post-secondary institutions that I've worked with, the Disability Service Office is really good about analyzing what a student might need, working with them to get that, and possibly even training. But then they send a student out into their life, and unless that student contacts them back, they don't really follow up and say, is that AT working for you? So this indicator is really getting at that idea that the student will have to self-evaluate if it's working for them, and they'll probably want to do it before they fail a test or are having problems in a class. So a better way to check in with that self-monitoring. Again, with all the indicators, we have a beginner level, and this would be a student that doesn't, a 1 would be a student that doesn't look at how their AT is working for them. They might have it, they might have advocated for it, but they're not really reflecting on, is it improving or helping with my academic performance? And a 5 is just having an accurate sense of what the AT is doing for them and that it's regularly reevaluating it. This is also really important because technology changes so rapidly that being really aware of how the assistive technology is doing for you, and if it's not living up to your, if it's not performing as you think it should, having that self-evaluation skill to know that there's probably other assistive technology out there that would help. Some ideas to surround activities to support these skills. In the academic area, you could evaluate, your note-taking. If you had a common accommodation in post-secondary is to have a student in the class take notes for you. If you use some assistive technology in place of that, really taking a baseline of, is that working better for you? In most cases, my anecdotal experience with students is they like it much more because they are in control of their note-taking as opposed to using another student's notes. But that would be a self-evaluation skill. And then the social skills around assistive technology would also fall into this area. So if you are an AAC user, augmentative communication user, what strategies do you use to repair breakdowns when you're working with friends, and what strategies do you use in a classroom setting, and being able to self-evaluate the success or not of those encounters. Make sure I'm still presenting. So the next indicator that we have on the matrix is the strategic use of assistive technology. The student uses a variety of assistive technology solutions and can independently choose the appropriate AT option for each situation. So this is, if you looked on a scale, you might be able to independently request and self-advocate and then evaluate how this is using. This is kind of the higher order thinking of strategically using assistive technology, knowing how to use various options, when you might use a low-tech device as a backup or in a different appropriate situation. So being really, in other words, sophisticated about how and when you use your assistive technology. So on the expert level with this, a student would know what assistive technology works best and can independently select the appropriate assistive technology for various situations. This is really important in post-secondary because students have many environments that they might be using assistive technology in, from a classroom to social settings in the dorms to library or common areas at the student union. And this might take a strategic planning or thinking about when and how to use that assistive technology. So this can be practiced as well. Determine when to use low-tech or no-tech. And just from, again, probably experience from all of us on this session, technology has hiccups, and so it's not bad to have a low-tech or a no-tech backup. Also thinking about when it's not appropriate or when you might have a low-tech option. Know who to help, who can help you when your AT is not a good solution for the task, and what other alternatives might be there. Again, this is something that can be thought about and practiced in that transition planning, but because transition is such a busy, there's so many things to be thinking about, it might fall off people's radar. So this tool, the student self-evaluation matrix, and this indicator is to pull us back onto thinking about assistive technology. So this indicator would help with choosing a tool. As an example, you might use an app or the LiveScribe pen, and if just a little description of both of those, an app would work to take notes on an iPad or a tablet, and a LiveScribe pen does a similar process where it records the lecture, but your notes are on specialized paper that you can go back and access. So this would take some strategic thinking about when and what to use for your assistive technology. I think at this point I'll turn it back to Gayl. We're just taking turns so you hear us both talk about all of the indicators, and we'll continue to go through each indicator with you.
You know, Janet has been talking about the kinds of things that students need to do at the college level. I don't think it's possible to say often enough that many of the skills we're discussing need to be addressed even earlier than the high school level. And this next quality indicator, the student uses AT accommodations effectively and independently, I think as K-12 educators, we need to begin to address this indicator as early as the day we provide assistive technology to a student, so that our focus is always on using AT accommodations for function that we've identified before we even provided the assistive technology, but also the focus on independence of AT use. So in my practice with individuals with disabilities, my question is, what's the next thing I can teach this student on how to be more independent and more effective with their assistive technology, so that I don't need to follow them around to make sure they're using it. I early on in my career as a person who did AT assessments, I met a mom and her daughter who was just headed to college, and the daughter had many supports throughout her high school career because of her physical disabilities, and we were asking her to begin to use assistive technology because we were aware that when she went to college she'd have fewer personal supports and probably need to be more independent. And at some point in the assessment process, her mom got really frustrated with her and said, you know, I am not going to college with you, as an expression of the fact that she really needed to see her daughter pick up the ball and become more independent using assistive technology. So we can't start early enough on this task, and I really want to encourage you to think about the second graders that you work with who are using assistive technology. We've looked at the 1 to 5 scale for each of these indicators. I wanted to look this time at the middle number, the number 3. Many of our high school students are at this level. So number 3 says, I can use some AT effectively and independently, but need help to use other AT solutions. As a person helping somebody get ready for transition to post-secondary environments, I want to help the student rate themselves accurately in their own abilities, but also help them move up that scale so that they're at least closer to a 5. Although I will say that we rarely see people who rate themselves number 5. A more common rating is a 4, because if you look at this one, I use all my AT independently and get help or technical assistance when I need it. Sometimes we just need somebody to help us troubleshoot technology solutions. So here's some objectives, some samples of things that you might be helping your students do to get ready for this transition. There's some AAC objectives, communication objectives, like order a meal using your AAC device. Participate in a job interview using an online video conference. Now, that's not an AAC objective, but it is a good communication objective. The second list is academic objectives, how students might be using assistive technology, not only for academics, but also for things like finding a movie using the internet and speech-to-text to find out what that movie might be, using an app in an apprenticeship program to take notes, using alternative computer input to file your taxes electronically. We have to begin to think about not just the academic aspects of AT use, but also the living aspects. AT problem solving, another indicator that I think we can start addressing very early on. So this one is this student knows strategies for identifying issues and problem solving and acquiring technical assistance when needed. Every time I read this indicator, I think of me standing next to a student and reaching in front of them to help to run the keyboard when they run into a technical problem, rather than acting as a good teacher to teach them what buttons they need to push or what things they need to do to troubleshoot. I try and keep myself from doing that, but it's sure easy for the sake of time to move forward and just try and get it solved so that they can move forward with their academic tasks. But like that mom I talked about, I am not going to college with that student. So here's the matrix again. Again, I want to point out the number 3 indicator, or the number 3 rating. I'm dependent on others to solve AT problems, but I can recognize when I need help with my AT. I see many of our students at that number 3 level. Suggested skills and activities. Operate a device with a minimum of help. Troubleshoot simple problems. Sometimes we give kids troubleshooting cards or lists of steps to take. They're often the same steps that we give to the IT people when they're helping us out. But also things like independently obtaining supplies, ordering printering for your technology, ordering special paper for your Braille note taker, for your Braille printer, things like that. Long-term planning. Long-term planning is our final indicator. And Janet alluded to this earlier in terms of knowing when the technology is getting outdated or when you need new technology to interact with new technology that the school might have. Helping students know how to make long-term plans for AT selection, acquisition, and use. And part of that relates back to our troubleshooting activities that we just talked about. Sometimes students tell us that they're trying to use outdated technology at school, even though the school keeps up with their technology and updates frequently the technology that students may have as their personal assistive technology may need updating in order to interact with that. So again, finally, the rating scale, the self-rating, and the number 5 rating is I make long-term plans and decisions about AT device selection, acquisition, and use. And part of that implies knowing how to make those plans so that you know when a new device is needed, so that you know how to ask for help getting a new device, going back to that possible connection to vocational rehabilitation or the Commission for the Blind that we talked about earlier. And also in long-term planning, we're talking about new goals. So once Eli gets that associate degree and he wants to move on to a university where he can take his forestry bachelor's degree program, will he need new assistive technology in that new environment? So those are some examples here. You've asked about the online matrix, so Janet's going to talk to you a little bit about the website and the kinds of things we're planning.
Great. Thank you, Gayl. So we're getting down to our time, and we will leave a few minutes for questions, but there was a question earlier about this tool, and it's not on the website right now, but to just give you a preview, we will have it as part of our QIAT-PS website, and it can be used in 2 ways on the website. A student can go there independently of any institution, K-12 or post-secondary, and just download and take the matrix and keep their scores on their own. It's also possible if you have an account with QIAT-PS, which is free, and you have created a post-secondary campus matrix, or not, or if you are in a K-12 school, you can send students the matrix to complete themselves, or send it to a student and complete it as a group. And then the results will be, for each student, will be stored within your school account. So if you are an assistive technology specialist, you can set up an account and have multiple students where you have this matrix in their score. And as Gayl alluded to, and I think is really valid, is the reason we are creating this student self-evaluation matrix is really to start teaching these skills that are around successful assistive technology use in post-secondary, to really start thinking about them and teaching them explicitly to students as soon as possible. And so what we envision is that you might use this matrix at an annual IEP meeting as soon as assistive technology is really introduced to the student. And of course, they will be in the 1s and 2s on their skill level very early on, but that you can see and mark progress with these skills, so that by the time they're moving into a post-secondary environment, they're really good to go with the self-advocacy and the problem-solving and the independent use and things that we're wanting to do, and it helps to have a visualization of that growth.
So Janet, I want to interrupt you because Christina made a comment that I just love in the chat box, and I wanted to make sure everybody heard it. She said, I adapted your post-secondary matrix and used it as a guide to support a 3rd and 4th grader. We then wrote a goal for self-advocacy per a rating scale based on a rubric. Sharing the rubric with the team helped the team members visualize long-term AT awareness and the advocacy needs. So I just had to put that in right now because it's so pertinent to what you were talking about.
Fantastic. I wasn't looking at the chat, but thank you, Christine, for sharing that. And you too, everyone else on the webinar, can do that as well. We're hoping that it will be flexible so that you can adapt that for your needs and use it with your students wherever they're at with their assistive technology skills. So the website is being updated right now, and it will, if you join our website or our email list, you'll have announcements about it when it's fully functioning. But as part of being part of this pre-release of the student evaluation matrix, we would love to also get your feedback on our new student, on the new student tool right now. So we would love for you all to be part of our collaborative team on working with that. And I see I have a question. Will self-evaluation matrices be available for students not affiliated with a campus account? Yes. So there will be 2 routes to get the matrix from our website. One route will be if you have an institution account, K-12 or post-secondary campus account. You can send the student matrix to any student and collect that as part of your account. But the matrix will be also available independently of any account or institution, and so students can just use it on their own for their, or if they don't want to be tracked with an institution, they still have access to the matrix. So you can go the student route or via an institution route. So as we are wrapping up here with final questions or comments, thinking about Eli from the beginning slide, what might Eli and his IEP team include in the transition plan based on QIAT-PS student self-evaluation matrix? And we would love for you to just chat your ideas here or any final questions. And Christine, as you are all typing, I'll read what Christine has said, which is, I'm happy to share what I put together, but it is nowhere near research-based. I'm looking forward to incorporating the new indicators and seeing your matrix. Thank you, and we would love feedback from all of you. And to see what you just did, we would, and if we didn't note this, we want to totally be sure to to note that this project is very collaborative. This whole tool, for example, is based on feedback we got when we were working with people on the campus tool, and they said we really need something like this. So this is definitely not Gayl and I just doing it. This is a collaborative from the field, so we would love for you to be part of that. And here is our contact information.